Welcome to the Meta Business Podcast. The Metaverse and Web3 are bringing about the biggest revolution since the internet itself. With your hosts, Paul the Prophet Dawalibi and Jeff the Juice Cohen, we will be bringing you the latest Metaverse business news and insight into what it all means. The Meta Business Podcast starts now.
From the boardroom to the Metaverse, this is the Meta Business Podcast. I am Paul the Prophet Dawalibi. I'm joined today by my friend and co-host, Jeff the Juice Cohen. For those of you who are new here, welcome to the official podcast of the Metaverse. What we do is we cover the most pressing Metaverse topics and news of the week, but we look at all of it through a business and C-suite lens. We dissect, we analyze the business implications of everything happening in this amazing industry. For our regular listeners, thank you guys for tuning in every week. Thank you for all the love, the 5-star ratings and reviews. If you haven't yet, go leave a review on the podcast. But more importantly, go share it. Send it to a colleague, send it to a friend. We really appreciate it. This is how we grow. Or maybe post it on your LinkedIn or on your socials. An episode that you particularly liked. That always helps. And we appreciate it. Jeff, how you doing this week?
I'm doing good. Doing good. Good as always. It's nice when it's still light out when we record, which is good. As we get later into the year, it gets, it's nicer out. So that's positive. How about you?
It's been crazy. I think you and I have commiserated that. I feel like this is maybe the busiest time of year, and like conferences are back. And so there's a lot of people going to conferences and a lot of like networking that's happening. And I just feel like it's extra busy. Like the business world is sort of getting back to normal is what it feels like. And obviously that has an impact, right? Like it just means more opportunity.
It's great to see that.
Plus, this industry is crazy because every week the numbers get bigger, the stories get bigger. So let's jump in, Jeff, because we've got some really good ones here this week. And as always, let's start with something a little, I don't know if I'd call this light, but it's, maybe less businessy.
Maybe dystopian.
Maybe dystopian, that's it. But the headline here, I really like this headline. It's the U.S. military building its own metaverse. Defense tech companies have latched onto the metaverse hype, but what they're building will be a far cry from Meta's virtual world. Now, it goes on to tell a story about, fighter pilots basically strapping onto AR headsets and doing missions like refueling missions and things like that on like this mix of augmented reality, AI, video game graphics for fighter pilots to practice dogfighting against virtual opponents, for example. So they're using metaverse related ideas to augment military systems, right? Whether that's AR or VR or AI or some mix of all of the above, which is sort of what the article dives into here. We don't necessarily need to touch on the specifics here, but I'm curious, what do you make of a military metaverse, right? A metaverse created purely for either like war games practice, call it, or to augment the capabilities of an actual military?
Yeah. Well, technologically, the military has a long kind of history of being pretty early in building stuff. The early internet, I believe, was developed by the military. There's many other things that ended up being consumer technology that actually, started in the military. So maybe there's some element of that here. Although I feel like they've basically taken something that's already been going on for a while, which is kind of like using gaming as it's almost like a practice for military activities, and just retransformed it with the word metaverse. Like, everything that we described there, like practicing dog fighting, stuff like that, is all stuff that is really already happening. And to me, it doesn't really rise to the level of being called a metaverse. Because I think one of the big areas for something to be a metaverse, at least in my mind, is being social, which this doesn't really seem to have that. And also having an economy where it's like people will have a sense of self and a sense of actual, there's actual commerce going on with goods and services and money transferring hands. Like in this example, I don't really see any of those things happening. So to me, at least, this is just them putting a different coat of paint on something that maybe is already happening. But yeah, I'm curious how you interpret it.
Yeah. The military doing anything in this space, I think, is interesting. Your insight in the beginning there was spot on. It was almost the take I was going to make, which was, the DARPA and the military created Web 1.0, why should we not assume that they may be the creators or the one of the biggest drivers of Web3? So that this to me makes sense. Obviously, to your point, also we've seen a lot of existing technologies just being leveraged in military sort of in military circles or in military scenarios. I always try and take it to the extreme here, right? And I think the conversation's most fun at the extreme. And one argument I've made, I don't think I've made it on this podcast, I definitely made it on the Business of Esports podcast, is that I believe at some point, soldiers, especially call it Air Force, but I think all soldiers eventually will be operating in some kind of metaverse. In other words, their existence will be in a virtual world. They will pilot craft in a virtual world. They will run around in a virtual world. There will be a real life sort of robotic, unmanned version of whatever they're doing in the real world, but in their minds, in the soldiers' perception, they're operating in a metaverse, right? And that soldiers could end up being part-time, right? Where I could come home and instead of driving for Uber, I log into the military metaverse, right? I fly a couple of missions, which just so happen to be there just so happens there to be a real world drone equivalent, right? Some kind of UAV equivalent that I'm piloting. But for me, I'm coming in, I'm playing a game, I'm operating in a metaverse, and the messiness of the real world is sort of obfuscated from me. I think this is
military to earn.
Military to earn. But it's true. It's actually great. Or fight to earn or something like that, right? But if we take this even to a larger extreme, eventually maybe there's a universe, there's some outcome here, some future where the real world piece of it doesn't even exist, where wars are fought entirely in metaverses with some agreed upon rules, and there's no loss of actual life or equipment at all, right? That it's all happening in virtual worlds where there's some agreement in terms of, here are the ground rules.
Yeah, I mean, I think if we take things to the logical extreme, where people are spending a lot of their time or much of their time in these virtual worlds and come to, value their self in that world and their possessions in that world as much as they do their physical self. Yeah, I think it does sort of stand to reason that maybe there will be factions, fights, wars. Then you come to more of like an existential question, like what happens if you die in the metaverse? Like, are you dead from that metaverse forever? Like, can you just re-log in? Like, what exactly happens there? That's an interesting one.
Good question.
So
yeah, I'm sure stuff we'll touch on over and over as people start thinking through these things and building these things. But this is one to watch, right? The military always at the cutting edge, always one of the biggest drivers of new tech. So anytime they're doing something, I think people need to sort of take notice. Let's talk about another big driver of tech and innovation, and that's Andreessen Horowitz, the fabled VC firm. I believe either the biggest or second biggest in the world at this point, like early stage VC, maybe only second to Sequoia. But Andreessen Horowitz launching a $600 million gaming fund. This announcement being made today, in fact, the day we're recording. And what they're saying, they're calling the fund Games Fund One, very creative name. It'll focus on a mix of game studios, gaming infrastructure companies, and consumer gaming software providers, similar to Discord and Twitch, that support gaming ecosystems and communities. Now, the fund has like a ton of investments in gaming stuff already. They've invested in Axie Infinity, the Axie Infinity's maker, Sky Mavis. They've invested in Roblox. They've invested in Oculus. They've invested in Zynga, right? They have a huge number of existing investments in gaming companies, but now they have a dedicated fund for this. And what's interesting about this, I think, at least, Jeff, but I want your thoughts. I'm sure it was somewhere in the announcement. I didn't read the official announcement from Andreessen Horowitz, but it's most definitely not blockchain gaming focused, right? It's not. They didn't say this is a blockchain gaming fund and we're only going to do blockchain games. This is very much games in general, which I would argue is sort of out of fashion these days, right? Like we do the Business of Esports podcast and we do this podcast, And there's a lot more news about blockchain game developers raising money than there are traditional studios raising money. So what do you make of the focus, and what do you make of Andreessen sort of carving this out as its own fund?
It's interesting. Like, I don't know. One, it's important to note, and I think we did talk about this last week, that, it is a watershed moment for the industry that we're seeing venerable funds like Andreessen Horowitz creating this large of gaming dedicated funds. So we shouldn't really gloss over that, because that is a massive milestone. I mean, you and I can still remember the times back when, VCs wouldn't even touch gaming because they just viewed it as too hit driven, and it was really viewed as a content industry and something that, didn't have much value or much long-term value for VCs. So I think that is pretty interesting to note. On the blockchain piece, I have two theories. I mean, one, I was reading another article where they were sort of asked about it, and they did say, like, they'll look at it. So maybe, it is interesting that they didn't break it out and note it. So maybe there's one element where they're just lumping that in, because the article that I'm looking at here, which I think was from GamesBeat, it says they're investing in kind of the following themes, and they list game studios, games and consumer, and then infrastructure. So it's possible that they're just kind of lumping Web3 in with game studios. Then obviously if it's an infrastructure thing, infrastructure, which I actually almost kind of like, because it's like, at the end of the day, I don't think we should necessarily be looking at Web3 as this strange other bucket. Like the best successful Web3 gaming studios are, at the end of the day, going to be game studios. So, I think if you're looking at them as something different, you're probably already looking through the wrong lens. However, I will put on my tinfoil hat and say, so that's one explanation. That's probably the one that I think is the right one. But if I put my tinfoil hat on, maybe it's possible that they didn't mention it because they're going to raise another fund specific for blockchain gaming. So that's just my little tinfoil hat theory. I don't know what you make of that.
Well, let me just throw this other story up, because in the same breath, there was an announcement for Kevin Lin, who's one of the co-founders of Twitch, his blockchain game studio Metatheory raising $24 million, and the round being led by Andreessen Horowitz, right? So I think we can agree that Andreessen Horowitz as a fund, whether it's this Games Fund 1 or Andreessen as a whole, it's not like they're getting out of blockchain gaming as some kind of focus area. Clearly, they're still investing a ton of money in that area. What I am curious about going forward, so definitely curious about your tinfoil hat theory there, because that would be interesting, right? A second $600 million fund just for blockchain games would probably be a mistake, I think. But
we've seen it, though. We've seen it with multiple other funds. But I agree with your point. It would be a mistake. But like, we have seen other funds do that, I think.
What I love from this is I'm curious how many existing funds that have said we're blockchain gaming funds will all of a sudden pivot back or to being just gaming funds, right? Like, at some point, I think this separation between gaming and blockchain gaming to your point, has to go away, because the most successful blockchain game studios will be game studios. So this differentiation has been always a little bit artificial. In some ways, it may even have held back blockchain games because you're not thinking about the gaming first. And I wonder how many will pivot back and sort of copy Andreessen, should Andreessen not come out with a separate blockchain gaming fund.
Mm-hmm. And I think the reason why there was so much emphasis on the separation at first is because it helped these VCs raise more money from their LPs, and then also the game companies were incentivized to do it because they were getting higher valuations. So I'm sure it's probably similar to when free to play mobile first became popular. I'm sure if you were a mobile game company and you were going to raise, you were like, well, we're a free to play mobile gaming developer. Now, like, you would never say you're just a mobile game company, right? Yeah. You wouldn't necessarily say what kind of or type of game you're building.
I also wonder if, I'm sure the folks at Andreessen Horowitz listen and consume our podcasts voraciously, but I think I said at one point that I believe there is a contrarian strategy here, because everyone is like, the blockchain gaming space is so red hot. The deals are so red hot. The valuations are so high. They're so competitive to get into. There's some like VC contrarian strategy that says we're only going to invest in traditional games. And so maybe this is Andreessen just being really clever here and going back to that. I don't know. I have a funny feeling this is just wording more than anything, and none of this was purposeful in any way. But for them, they can cast a wide net because they're a massive fund, right? And it's not like they have no issues raising money. They don't need like some clever new strategy. They just hit up their LPs, and the LPs will write whatever check they want. So I think we may be giving them a little bit too much credit here. It may just be.
This is what we do here. We dissect, we analyze. That's what we say in the beginning.
Well, let's dissect this next one. Jeff, this one, you flagged this. I thought it was super interesting. Blockchain Games report from DappRadar. And we could probably spend an entire hour just on what's in here, but let me just read some of the key takeaways that they had listed in the article. And then I know there's specific things you wanted to point out, which we'll talk about, but some of the key takeaways. It said, despite the negative trend in the markets, blockchain games continue to perform well. All-time high in daily activity with 1.23 million
active wallets, unique active wallets.
Yes, interacting with blockchain games in April, so that's monthly. Splinterlands remains the leading blockchain game with an average of 350,000 daily unique active wallets in April. And Other Side, which is from Yuga Labs, became the most traded virtual world project to date with 723 million in sales. The Yuga Labs Metaverse project surpassed Decentraland and the Sandbox all-time trading volume in just 2 weeks. Investments keep pouring into the space. $4.5 billion raised by blockchain games and infrastructure projects in 2022, surpassing the 4.1 billion raised last year. So already by April, more money has been raised than the entirety of last year, which is insane. The last point they make is the popularity of move to earn dApps is on the rise. The number of GST, which is STEPN's utility token, unique holders grew 350% from the end of March. We all know STEPN had sort of a great launch and a lot of hype around it. But I don't know if you want to dig into any of these, Jeff, if there's other things.
All of them are there's one or two other things, I guess. Maybe one other thing I wanted to point out at the end, but all of those were super interesting. The first one, I don't know if you want to scroll back up to them. I'm always interested when I hear, kind of the daily active numbers in terms of unique active wallets, because it's still so small. And it feels like every time we say this, and I apologize if we repeat ourselves sometimes, but it's like 1.23 million is the entire total addressable market for blockchain gamers currently. That is so small compared to, what's the number we always throw out there? 3 billion gamers. So we are orders
or like 100 million people playing PUBG Mobile, or we
are orders of magnitude, kind of away from that. And then the next one, Splinterlands, the number one blockchain game currently, 350,000 daily players. Like that is like not even a blip on the radar.
What's funny about that one? When you remember when New World came out and on the business of esports, and when it was on the decline, it was like hitting about 400,000. Yep. And we're saying this game's dead. The game's totally dead, right? Like at 400,000 players, we were basically calling the game dead.
So, it's wild. And obviously the growth trajectory is there. There's a reason why we're talking about it. And again, I think the fourth bullet point here, where we talk about the investment pouring into the space, we've said it many, many times, the games are coming. When there's that much investment, clearly the games will follow. The next thing I wanted to dig into and get your opinion a little bit on is this Other Side one. Yeah. Because I think it's a story that I don't know that we actually covered that much, even though it was a massive news announcement just around Yuga Labs and this launch of the Other Side, Metaverse platform. We talk a lot on this podcast about Sandbox and Decentraland, and they've almost really established themselves as, I would say, the really most mainstream blockchain specific metaverses. I think if we talk about metaverses more broadly, I would put Roblox. We would definitely put Fortnite, maybe even like Grand Theft Auto, Call of Duty. Like there's other quote unquote metaverses that we would probably put ahead of them, certainly in terms of adoption. But when we're thinking about Web3 blockchain metaverses, Sandbox, Decentraland are usually the first ones we talk about. So the Other Side has already exceeded them in terms of land sales value. So does this put them into the driver's seat? They clearly have a massive brand with with the Bored Apes? Like, are they the new hot metaverse we're going to be talking about on this show?
I mean, why does this metric even matter, though? Right? That's the funny part to me. Right? Like, again, no one more bullish on metaverse than I am. The question is, I don't really get this. I don't get the land sales being any kind of metric of success, other than it's a hype metric, right? It's a reach metric. In other words, how many people knew about this, how hyped were they, and how much, and therefore how much money did they spend? But they haven't bought anything that does anything. And as far as I know, other side doesn't do anything yet, right? Like there's no reason to go to the other side. And
I'm not even aware if it exists. Like, is it a game that you could even go to?
I don't think so.
I don't think it exists yet. I think it's like a concept. It's like a pitch deck. As far as I know, we could be totally wrong.
I mean, and so you're generating all these trades and trading volume and like millions and millions changing hands, but nothing has been created here, right? Like there's no reason to do any of this other than I don't know. Again, it's other than sort of speculation on an asset that may in the future have value for an unknown reason to me, because it's not clear why any of these land parcels will have future value. You know, I think it's Warren Buffett who said, you know, can't farm them. You can't, right? Like you can't rent them out. There's no like,
yeah,
there's doesn't generate, it doesn't create anything new. It's just money changing hands. And so I'm bothered by this one because who cares? Who cares what the land sales are, right? If tomorrow Decentraland creates some killer reason why millions of people need to go to Decentraland, to hang out there, to do something there, to whatever, right? All the land sale stuff doesn't matter anymore, right? What's the project at the bottom of this one? World Wide Web Land. I've never even heard of these guys, right? Like, if tomorrow they figure out the killer app, you go there to browse the web in the metaverse. But it's kind of like, who cares? These are fake metrics.
Agreed.
And all they represent is hype.
Player-based numbers would obviously clearly be a much more relevant statistic.
Yes. Yeah. The other piece that I think you brought up was this one, which I think is worth us spending a minute or two on. And for those of you who are listening to this, which is most of you, this is a pie chart, and the headline of the pie chart says, where are blockchain game investments going? So that 4 billion plus number, you know, where is that all being directed towards? Where is it being focused? The 4.5 billion. And the way this pie chart's broken out, I'll go from sort of most to least here. Infrastructure number 1.57 billion, and that's 37%, 37.3% of all the investment. Guild or incubator number 2 at 19% or 0.8 billion. Investment firms 18.1% or 0.76 billion. Game/metaverse projects, ironically in fourth place, 16.7%, 0.7 billion. NFTs 8.5%, 0.36 billion. And then in last place here, in a pretty far away last place, media 0.2% and 0.01 billion.
I have some. Well, so you sort of stole my take a little bit with your just kind of your reaction there, because actually it's something when I brought this up at first I didn't even contemplate. Now that I'm thinking about it, it sort of sticks out very clearly. How is game not number one? Like, that should be pretty important to building these. I mean, infrastructure, yeah, I get, and that could include, you know, various blockchains like that. That's sort of important, like the pipes, what's actually being built on. That matters. But then you have guild. I was shocked that number 2 is guilds. I mean, that is effectively just the financing structure, a way to finance players into your game, right? We've talked about it as like
banks,
indentured servitude. It's basically like fintech for this GameFi, which I think eventually gets, you know, if blockchain gaming is to survive in any form or fashion, this guild system probably is going to have to go away, because if I have to take out a bank loan to start playing a game, like, it's just a bad user experience. Like, that is not a good, strategy for user acquisition for your game. Like, hey, go take out a loan so you could buy assets in my game. No, that's bad. And then the third being investment firm kind of makes sense because of the way these things have sparked up. It's basically just speculation and trading. But like, come on, investment firm? Like, this is about blockchain gaming. Why isn't investments into investment firms? What's happening? Like, that doesn't even make sense. And then NFTs was surprisingly low for some reason. I actually thought that would have been higher just because of all the hype. But yeah,
keep in mind, this is just to date in 2022, right? This is just literally in the first 4 months of the year.
Yeah. And then media is low, which I know you probably have some thoughts on, given your business.
I have obviously very strong thoughts. But look, I draw a couple of conclusions from this. One, media, massively overlooked opportunity. Why we're the leaders in the space, why we're doing what we're doing, why we're building what we're building. It's because almost no one's looking there and they're missing the opportunity. They're missing the boat because what are people going to do in these places is consume media of some sort. People want to talk about it. People want to know about it. People want to learn about it, right? Like it feeds the rest and it's massively, there's a massive amount of underinvestment. I don't even know if that's a word, right? In that category, I think. So definitely where I see opportunity is where a lot of people are not looking. I think this confirms my thesis in many ways. Same comment you had though, like the Gilder incubator being number 2 is crazy. And this is in my mind, the stupid money chasing short-term profit without any concept of how do you build a sustainable long-term business, right? It's like easy money, plenty of people in the third world playing play to earn games. Let's exploit them with these guilds and these guilds. We can make a quick buck. And then, as the margins, essentially, as the earned piece gets smaller and smaller, the more players you get in there, eventually it goes away, but you've made a quick buck in the meantime. So it's like typical short-term investor thinking. Doesn't surprise me that it's number 2. I do think game/metaverse projects should probably be number 1. But I just, the overall, the other than the media piece being way too small and that being a missed opportunity, I think most investors are just not seeing. It's that it's like the gaming space. There's a lot of dumb money sloshing around going after either short-term bucks or not looking at the right things, right? Just not looking at the space in the right way. And maybe investment firm gives me some comfort that a lot of the money coming in admits they have no clue. So let's try and give it to people who may have a clue. But there's a lot of like, have no clue, which is what I saw at the beginning of the gaming space 3-4 years ago when money started pouring into esports and gaming, huge amounts of investment. What was missing was the brains to actually invest it and the knowledge to actually invest it wisely. We're going through a similar cycle in my mind.
That's a fun chart. It'll be interesting to watch. I think this report comes out monthly, so it'll be interesting to track that. That was a fun one, actually.
Definitely. And I think the perfect to end on, Jeff, as always, these fly by. Thank you guys for everyone who tunes in every week. Don't forget, subscribe to the podcast. Go subscribe to our brother and sister podcast, if you want to call it that, Meta Woman and the Business of Esports. If you love this kind of content, there's so much more content that we do every week. Go follow Jeff on Twitter at JeffCohen23. He's got all kinds of great takes during the week that you crave from the podcast. You can get it on his Twitter feed every single day. And make sure to share it with a friend. Don't forget, send this podcast, put it on your socials, share it with a friend. We really appreciate it. Don't forget, the future is fun, guys. We'll see you next week.
Thanks for joining us here on Meta Business. Make sure to subscribe to this podcast everywhere you get your podcasts, leave a 5-star review, and tell your friends, family, and colleagues all about us. Also, make sure to follow Meta TV on all socials to get more of the best Metaverse content anywhere. Tune in every week for another episode of Meta Business.